say. Okay. I was really very excited that Theresa Gattung has agreed to speak at the conference today. Theresa is the chair of the Wool Partners International and the non-executive chair of the board of the AIA Australia Limited. Her achievements over the year have made her a household name in New Zealand and throughout the world. And she's probably best known for her tenure as the CEO and the Managing Director of Telecom. She's a business personality, author of Bird on a Wire, named in the Fortune magazine's list of the 50 most powerful women in the international world several times since 2002. She's been included in the Forbes list of the world's 50 most powerful women across the sphere in 2006, and her list of accolades just goes on and on and on. And where did all this begin? As a teenager, when she dreamed of running a big New Zealand company by the age of 40. Something she achieved with a couple of years to spare. And so therefore it's very appropriate that Theresa's talk this afternoon is aptly entitled Dare to Dream. So please join with me in welcoming Theresa Gattung.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's really great to be here. And can I just start by checking that everyone up there can hear me? Can you all hear me quite clearly? Yep, good. Thumbs up. Great. Dare to dream. I'm going to tell a few stories from my own life and then pull out some of the learnings. Actually, I'm going to do that on the way through because that's the way I talk, but wrap it up with some of the learnings that, what I've come to believe given my experience in business and in life more generally. But I want to start right back at the beginning. I'm the daughter of immigrant parents. My parents were 10-pound poms. My father actually came from a very, very working class Cockney family, a big family, and he was a very intelligent man but unable to go to university. Left school quite early to support his family. But I did get lucky because he only had sisters, 5 of them. 5 sisters, no brothers, does make a lad rather, good dealing with women. And he went on to have 4 daughters, of whom I'm the eldest. So, anyway, he spent 2 years in North Africa in the army, as you did in those days, and that really opened his eyes to a bigger life than what he would have if he stayed in England, where essentially everyone did what their parents did before them, and they pretty much lived in the same place that their parents and the generations before lived in. In his case, actually, I would prefer that he had have followed his father, because his father was a baker. His father was a baker. His father was a baker, and I actually quite like baking, and I like eating. So I would have preferred that Dad was that than what he became, which was actually a town planner. But anyway, he came back from the army and really had the sense that he didn't want to have that sort of life. Shortly after he came back, he met my mum at a dance. She was 19, and she thought she'd been left on the shelf. And this is true. And the last time I told the story in public, my mother was in the audience. And everyone looked at her and she nodded. So I know that this is true. So they met and they got engaged 6 weeks later. And the way that they got engaged was Dad said to Mum, "I'm going to live in New Zealand." And Mum said, "What about me?" And he said, "You're coming too." And that was about as romantic as it got. So can you imagine my mum going home to her mother, Betty Clay, who's drawing the dishes, "Mum, I'm marrying John and I'm going to live in New Zealand." Well, if your 19-year-old daughter came home and said she was going to live on the other side of the world and marry a guy she just met, you'd probably have a few doubts about it. But it worked out very well because both their families followed them over. So this had a happy ending. So they hopped on the boat, and it was a boat in those days, a slow trip to New Zealand, and got here, 10-pound poms, and essentially set out to make a life they could never have had at home. So education was really fundamental to that, I always knew that I was going to go to university. I've always loved books. My mother loved books. She'd take me to the library. We'd get 2 books out a week. We'd read them. We'd take them back and we'd get 2 more books out a week. And I do totally agree with Paul Holmes, who said you can't be a writer unless you are a reader. It is absolutely axiomatic. You have to like words and really enjoy reading to be able to put words in print yourself. So well, where do I go after that? I was brought up Catholic, and that's never left me. I'm a retired Catholic now, you understand. But that sense of something bigger going on than just me and what I want to achieve for me has really never left me. And now that I have a little bit more time, I'm starting to do things in my charitable foundation I set up last year that actually bring me a lot of joy in a different way. But back then I was, the eldest of immigrant parents, and I was in a terrific hurry. And what Mum and Dad really taught us was a powerful sort of combination of ultimate possibility. Both my parents believed that we could be anything we wanted to be, and as long as we were being true to ourselves and really working it didn't matter what that was. It wasn't prescribed that we had to be anything in particular, but that we should mine and understand our own talents and then build on those. And so I grew up in a situation, a family really, where possibility was coupled with hard work. And so I call that philosophy. Be, imagine what might be possible. Do whatever the work is required, and have. And that now, there's a book on that now, Malcolm Gladwell, his latest book, takes 10,000 hours to master anything. Even if you start with talent, 10,000 hours. So sometimes I look at sort of reality TV and I look at youngsters these days and I go, blimmin' heck, is it just me, or do they think the world works be-have? Just imagine, and then you're a celebrity and you're world famous and, life gets better and better and better. So be, do, have was really the philosophy I grew up with. I was actually a bit of a nerdy swot at school, and I went to a Catholic school and the nuns were the role models, and they were great. Some people had bad experience at Catholic schools. I had a great experience, the role modelling of the nuns. My best friend and I did an extra subject at high school, and then we became joint ducks. So that's what I say about being nerdy swats, but we did play hockey as well. I had a great deal of difficulty deciding what I was going to do at university because I had done everything at high school, because I'd done languages and sciences and accounting and economics, everything. I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. I did have a quite interesting experience in my final year at high school. That was the year that we had joint classes with the boys at the boys' school next door. And that was the first time I encountered any form of discrimination and any form of people thinking there were things boys could do better than girls. In this case, it was the brothers thinking that boys could do maths better than girls. Well, by the time you're 17, your sense of yourself is formed. So I thought, well, they've got it wrong. So that was just as well, didn't slow me down. But if you had that from a much younger age, it would absolutely limit your sense of possibility. In the event, I decided to go to Waikato University because I was living in Rotorua. That's where my boyfriend was going. And University of Waikato were fantastic at marketing. They brought you there from the Rotorua schools, you spent a day there, and I loved the look of the management degree, and I really liked it because you could do business courses and you could do other things as well. It was a 4-year program. And that's what I did. I did business degree, majoring in economics and marketing, but I also did languages. I did Japanese, and I did women's studies in the School of Politics. Well, even today, there wouldn't be very many students doing business and, women's studies. And in those days, more years ago than I care to remember, it was absolutely unheard of. And I really didn't fit. I really didn't fit either environment. There were very few women at business school, and the ones that were there were really quite meek and quiet, and that's really not my way at all. And over at women's studies, there were of course no men, but you had to have a particular ideology to fit there, and I clearly didn't, because I had a dollar sign on my forehead, obviously. I was a capitalist. So I just sort of didn't fit in either place, and it was quite an early lesson for me in how sometimes being true to yourself means that you don't fit in with your peers. It might be that you're ahead of your time. It might be that you're just plain eccentric. I'm up for either explanation. But it isn't always comfortable to be yourself. You can find yourself in a situation where you're out of step with the people around you, and you have to choose, am I going to choose to fit in here, or I'm going to choose to pursue the things that really matter to me? And those issues both really mattered to me. I was and am a strong feminist. That mattered to me to study that at university. It was a tremendous opportunity. The reading lists were amazing. The conversation was stimulating. And it mattered to me that I wanted to have a career. And I thought, I had talents in management and wanted to explore it. But having said that, I'm up for the explanation that I'm a bit eccentric, because it was during that first year at business school I read Dr. Helen Place's book about women in management in New Zealand, and there were no women, running big companies. And that's when I decided, I can still remember sitting in my room at Bryant Hall at the University of Waikato deciding, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run a large company in New Zealand by the time I'm 40. So once I decided that, I started wearing suits to university. Because that was just my way of visualising it happening. Now, my boyfriend at the time, who was also doing a business degree, he thought that was a cool idea too. So he only had one suit, and he went and bought every colour Pierre Cardin shirt you could get, light pink, light green, dark green, etc. And we went off to, he was quite tall, we went off to university together, decked out in our suits. I mean, we must have been quite a sight. Well, 6 months later, he came out as gay, so one might think I should have suspected. It took some courage to dress like he did, walking around Waikato, which was, reasonably sort of conservative campus. I finished my degree, and I got offered lots of jobs, but I had a hankering to do law. I'd always, I think this is sort of the Catholic in me, always had this idea of this sort of, this lawyer who would be fighting for various causes. And so I decided to go to law school, and of course I realised law wasn't like that at all. But what was very interesting for me going to Victoria University was it was completely different Waikato. It was very serious. It was like the university for grown-ups versus, the overgrown school campus. I'm not being critical about either. I'm just trying to explain the feeling was different. Victoria was full of people like me who were working part-time and studying full-time, or vice versa, rushing up the hill to go to lectures. Now, all my life, of course, I had been seen and been living the power of individual seed energy. If you want something enough, if you believe in it enough, you can make it happen. That's now called a book called The Secret by Rhoda Byrne, and she's become a multi-millionaire, and everyone thinks it's a new idea. It's not a new idea. It has, however, been packaged and marketed quite well in the last few years. But what I saw at Victoria University was something equally powerful, and that was the power of collective energy. I went through law school, sitting in many lecture theatres just like this, because at Victoria they taught in the Socratic method. So the lecturer down here would be looking at people up there and calling you out by name to present on the cases. Not quite like on the TV program, but something like that. I went through at the time with a cohort of students who were all mature students like me, because you were called a mature student as soon as you were 22 rather than 18. Now I look back and think, we're all still very immature, but anyway. They were dedicated to making New Zealand a fairer place for their iwi. So I went through people like Joe Williams and Curry Wainwright, and they're all now judges or senior lawyers, and I don't know whether they think that they've made a difference, but I look back and say, gosh, in the last 25 years, New Zealand has changed out of sight, just out of sight, in terms of both political power. If you think of the Maori Party, and you think of the economic power in terms of the treaty settlement process and what that's done. I mean, the South Island, think about Ngāi Tahu and what they have created. So, I saw a group of people who were doing it not just so they would, become partners in law firms and make a lot of money, but they were doing it for their people and for their country. And that sort of stuck with me as well, that this was another way of living your life, and I hadn't really been exposed to that. I got very sick when I was doing my law degree because I pushed myself too hard. I got really good grades at business school, I got honours. I didn't want to be a full-time student. So when I came to Wellington, I got a job at TVNZ. And the job was a full-time job, which I said I'll do part-time. So I'm doing a full-time law load and a part-time job. What do you think happens? You think the job fits me? No, the job's really a full-time job. So I got very stressed, and I had a pain like an abscess in my teeth that never went away. And I had that pain for a long time, and my dentist kept drilling various teeth and, killing them basically. Had to be root filling them. And eventually she put down her drill and she said, look, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't know what it is, but it's not your teeth. I got referred to Wellington Hospital, and they diagnosed something called TMJ, temporal mandibular joint syndrome. And the guy that diagnosed us, the specialist, said, this is triggered by stress. And I said, who, me? Stressed? Wrong person. So I basically, refused to accept the diagnosis. So he gave me a bite plate which controlled the pain, but it wasn't really until I reflected on the fact that he was probably right and changed my life that it really made a difference. And that is when I started exercising every day. I swim every morning. That's when I started having massage every week. I basically stopped drinking alcohol. I stopped drinking tea and coffee, although I did reintroduce those things later, but, in much more moderate ways. So I started taking care of myself, and if I hadn't had that physical collapse in my mid-20s, I never would have become CEO of Telecom. I never would have survived that gruelling 8 years. So that's the first thing I think. Whatever age and stage, look after your health. Look after your health. That is the most important thing. Without that, you have nothing else. And really my year of agony, I don't remember the year I was 26 because mostly I was in a great deal of pain. Well, when I came out the end of that, I thought, I'm going for it. I've got my business degree. I've just about finished this law degree. I want to be a merchant banker. So I tried really hard to get into merchant banking and I couldn't. And one guy did me a favour by saying, well, look, we don't hire women. He didn't put that in the rejection letter, by the way. That was just verbal. Now, that company went broke in the 87 crash, so serves them right. But, of course, he was telling the truth. I mean, as recently as last year, there's been international settlements for women who've been discriminated against in that industry. So I think he was actually basically telling it like it was. And my father used to say, when a door closes in your face, find a window. So I was really keen to go into financial services, and so I answered an ad for the head of marketing at National Mutual, and that's where I went. People were really surprised. I left TVNZ, quite a glamorous organisation, to go to something that wasn't very glamorous, but it was a really good experience. I just learnt so much dealing with life insurance agents who, they didn't want to listen to the chick from Wellington from marketing. They didn't have to turn up. They were self-employed people. You had no positional power over them. And that was a very good background for dealing with farmers, as it turns out. Anyway, after several years there, I decided that I was only ever going to be the token woman in management, and when the opportunity came up, I would move on. And I saw an ad for the role of Chief Manager of Marketing at the Bank of New Zealand. So I applied for that job and got it. And I remember skipping down Willis Street, just thinking I was the bee's knees. On this particular day in September 1990, that was my first day on the job. Well, I'd hardly got my bottom on the chair when I got a call from the CEO's office, can you please come up and see Lindsay, Theresa? So, of course, I went up, thinking, well, he can't fire me on the first day. So, well, as I sat down, he said, Theresa, I'm really sorry. I have to tell you something I couldn't tell you in the recruitment process. But it's going to be announced that we're having a restructuring, which is sort of a fancy word for a government bailout. Most of you are around my age, so you will remember a certain Sunday, September 1990, with the incoming Bolger administration were told by Treasury and BNZ officials that the bank needed a bailout of $770 million. And of course, that's why Jim Bolger would say they brought in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, many years later, to make that impossible to happen again, so that the government now has to open the books in the campaign so that the opposition can't make promises that they then can't meet because there's a big unfunded liability that the government knew about but they didn't. But anyway, that's all the macro-political picture. For me, I've been hired as the head of marketing. This is pre-internet banking days where staff interaction is the main thing, and now we're going to have a hard job getting customers not running screaming for the exits. So, but in every cloud there is indeed a silver lining, and Lindsay had built a great team. Rod Carr was CEO of Jade, now Vice Chancellor at Canterbury University. Rob Five, CEO of Air New Zealand. Sam Knowles, CEO of Kiwi Bank. These were all the people in that team. It was a fantastic team. And we basically decided that we would stand the bank up again, and we did that through working with people. We basically went out to the staff and recreated a vision of the bank, and several years later, it was sold for a lot of money to National Australia Bank. So, we were successful in that. I can remember the day that Lindsay waltzed in and said, right, we're selling to NAB's bought us, and poof, he was gone in a puff of smoke, literally that afternoon, as often happens with CEOs when there's a takeover. I think I might have cried because I just loved that job so much in that situation. But just taking a step back, one of the things that we did in those few years was, of course, I see all these companies doing it now, the whole sort of milking of New Zealand Inc., positioning themselves in New Zealand Inc. The Bank of New Zealand was doing that back in the 90s. The whole America's Cup Supporters campaign was all about that. Now, it was while we originated the idea of that campaign, it was while I was on the boat off San Diego watching the race that I saw a woman waving an American flag. And I looked at her and I thought, I know you. You're in my clipping file. Because when I decided that I was going to become a CEO at the time I was 40, I started a clipping file of women in senior corporate roles mainly in New Zealand and Australia and America. And I had clipped some clippings about Dr. Sharon Lord because she was the highest ranked woman at the Pentagon. And there she was on the boat. So I went up to her and I said, Dr. Sharon Lord, I'm Theresa Gattung. "You don't know me, but you're in my clipping file." Yes, well, she laughed too. Of course, today that's a really funny idea because you can Google 50 people a day, can't you? You don't have to have a clipping file. But anyway, well, that's amazing enough. But the next bit is even more amazing. It turns out that she just married actually. She just married Tom Burns, who was about to become the CEO of Telecom. And she was from West Virginia, but they were about to come and live in Wellington. I know, so why do I mention this? Well, she became my mentor. She duly turned up in McFarlane Street, across the road from the swimming pool where I went every morning, and she became a great mentor to helping me through from middle management to senior management. And one of the things she always used to talk about was, it's really important to picture yourself in the next stage. And she didn't just mean the way I had been conceiving it in the past, although I was sort of trying to do that. She meant think about the situation from the next level. So she would always say, look, the mistakes of youth are the mistakes of ego. Don't make those mistakes. Think about it from the biggest possible picture you can. Take as longer term view, take as global a view. Don't get bogged down in infighting and territoriality and pettiness and small-mindedness. I mean, be bigger than that. You can never go wrong if you are the biggest person in a situation. And I just think that was an amazing lesson. It helped me. It's helped me my whole life, just articulating that. I don't always live it. Sometimes it's, we're all human, but I think she gave me very good advice. Anyway, at that time, I was at the bank, but I was really starting to get frustrated because I'd had such autonomy, and NAB came in. Well, that's fine, but, they were Australians, and they wanted to do it their way, which is entirely fair enough. It was their bank, but it didn't really fit with me. So I left about 6 months later, but how I came to leave was I actually had a wee altercation in my car because I'm not a very good driver, and I drove my car off a little bank. Well, that's not that surprising, except I was on the way home at the time, so it is a little bit surprising that you can't even keep your car on the road on your way home. But I waved down the car behind me to help me get my car back onto the road, and he waved down the car behind them, and I took him to lunch as a thank you for it. And it turned out he was the head of marketing at Telecom, but he was about to go back to America. So that's how I knew that the head of marketing job was available. And so I thought, well, this is cool. This is about the only job that could be better than the head of marketing at the Bank of New Zealand. So I tried to get myself on the shortlist because through the advertising agency, who we had in common, etc., and I absolutely failed. And when I read that they were going to go overseas to recruit for that role, because there's no one in New Zealand, I rang Sharon and I said, well, look, what should I do? And she said, well, ring Roderick directly, who was obviously the CEO then. And I said, but I don't know him. And she said, well, so what? You haven't got the job now. What have you got to lose? And that's so obvious, but it's so hard, isn't it? I mean, if it's a man you want or a job, I mean, what have you got to lose? I mean, you never know. You might get what you want, and if you don't, you're no worse off. But of course, in those days, as a CEO, it was very easy to, be protected behind a phalanx of EAs. These days, it's actually hard, and it's actually easy to access a CEO. You just figure out what the email address is for the organisation, put the dude's names in the appropriate places, and bang, it's straight to his BlackBerry, and he's reading it wherever he is. So it's easy to contact almost anyone in the world these days, really easy. But it was much harder then. So, of course, I didn't get through to him. I didn't get through to his EA. I got through to the woman who answered phones in the company, and that was it. But she put me through to the head of HR, and he said, oh, this is interesting, Theresa. And when can you come over? Well, I'm sitting in my office in the Blacktown, Willow Street, looking down on their office in Jervois Quay, saying, how about now? Which is exactly what I did. Well, I had several interviews for that job, and then I got offered it. And what was interesting about that was I wasn't the first person to be offered that job. Other people had turned it down, and they turned it down because the head of marketing didn't report to Roderick as a CEO, it reported to the chief operating officer. And I was leaving a situation where I reported to the CEO. And that's really interesting that people would think about things just in a positional power way, but they do. But what I've learnt in business and in any situation is that it's not like university where you have a curriculum to study and, that's what you study and that's what you're tested on. When you get out of the water, it closes behind you, and boy, I've experienced that. And when you go into the water, you change something from being there. And I had seen that in my first ever job. I think your first ever job's a bit like your first ever boyfriend. It's sort of ingrained forever. Well, in my first ever job at TVNZ, my boss's boss wanted to hire an attractive woman to host parties. And even he knew in those unreconstructed days, and believe me, TVNZ was a very unreconstructed place, that he couldn't advertise for a woman to host parties. So he called the role National Sales Development Manager. Do you think he fudged it enough? Well, anyway, the woman who got the job, who was attractive, Cindy Mitchener, she either didn't know or didn't care that that's what he really wanted. So she did host parties, but she set about making it a real job. She did deals. She made it a huge job. And so I had seen, right off the block, right out of university, first time round, that, sometimes in business it's better just to do it and ask forgiveness if you get it wrong than ask permission, And so it didn't, to me it was like, okay, well, I'll go into that situation and I'll create something of it. So if you're blocked or you're stuck or you're bored, I don't think you should, stay somewhere, not open up the possibility of new and great experiences just because it looks like a sideways move, because I've moved sideways most of my career. Any event, and what happened in this situation was, 18 months later, the chief operating officer retired, and I effectively got his job. So, that was the end of that. That was the end of that story. Well, those several years at Telecom when I ran the New Zealand business were an amazing time, because when I went to Telecom, I had to have a separate suitcase for my cell phone, right? It was that big. And I had a pager. I mean, who has a pager? It's just a bizarre notion these days. And that was the time when the internet was introduced. I remember coming back from a conference in France about the internet, and they were being part of a panel talking about it. And a woman in the audience said, "Oh, the internet would be terrible." And we said, "Why would it be terrible?" And she said, "Because then we wouldn't know what to believe." Well, people laughed, but she was really prescient. Because, of course, the internet is the complete opposite of patriarchal, one source of knowledge. I mean, it's like everyone's voice is equal on the internet. And so I think she grasped something immediately about the internet that took many of us a lot longer to actually figure out. So anyway, that was in a sort of an amazing period when, there was just a lot going on, a lot of change really fast. And then in early 99, Roderick announced that he was going to become chairman, and I had no idea that was going to happen, but from the minute I heard that, I went into project CEO mode. So you'll probably guess what was the first thing I did, which was get a new wardrobe. The CEO-like wardrobe. And I obviously was doing my job at the same time, and there were other people in the company who wanted that job, and it was very interesting watching the different behaviours. Some of us were able to maintain a very good working relationship through that period, and others of us struggled. And, I have observed this in life that, whatever situation you find yourself in, you're going to find some of the people will be constructive all the time. Some of the people were people who, as kids, threw pebbles in a pond to see what the ripples would do. And most people in the middle will go with what the cultural norm of the organisation is. So to get a culture shift in an organisation, you have to shift, the cultural norm of the leadership. You don't have to shift everybody, but you have to make sure you don't recruit too many people who are people throwers. I became CEO it was announced in August 99, and just a few weeks before that, I'd been part of a story, 10 powerful people in New Zealand business you've never heard of. So that was July 99, and then in August 99, I got the job, and I was completely unprepared for, the level of exposure that came with it. So, what can I tell you about that period? Nothing in a few minutes. However, it's in my book. That 8 years was, the best of times and the worst of times. It was everything I'd ever thought I wanted, and it was everything I absolutely didn't want. And the last 2 years of that, the 3 hardest years of my life was the year of physical pain when I was 26, and my last 2 years of being CEO, because in my second last year, John and I separated after being together over 20 years. And in my last year, well, you guys read the newspapers, you know what happened in the last year. So I was so exhausted when I finished at Telecom, which was the end of financial year 2007. I went overseas, and I actually thought I might live overseas, but I came back to New Zealand, and nearly everyone I love lives here, and it's just a fantastic country. I love everything about it. I love the cityness of it. I like shopping. I'm quite a girly girl, but I love the countryness of it. I ride my horse every weekend that I possibly can. So I decided I would live in New Zealand and try and create the sort of life I'd had as CEO, i.e. based here but spending a lot of time overseas, and that's pretty much what I do. Anyway, I had a year off. I'd read a book by Robert Crumb called My Year Off. Some of you might have read that. And he had a stroke and took a year off. And I remember thinking, that's a really cool idea. I'll have the year off but without the stroke. So that's what I did. I went horse riding in Argentina, which is fantastic because they worship horses there, absolutely worship horses. And you just ride really, really well-mannered polo ponies, so it's not at all dangerous, and it's great fun. And I went shopping in London, Paris, Milan and New York with my girlfriend. So that was a fantastic time, and one day when I was in Queenstown, towards the end of that year, I got a call from Craig Norgate saying, look, we'd like to stand up the wool industry. It used to be New Zealand's proudest export centre, and it's really been in disrepair for 20 years. And if I knew now what I knew then, I might not have taken it on, but I've always loved wool. This is a wool jacket. I've always loved wool. And I thought I could make a contribution and do some amazing things. And that has been an amazing 2.5 years. Some of you will have seen the deal we announced 6 weeks ago. The LIANZA, which is the brand we've created of directly traceable wool all the way from farm. Big deal with Starbucks, a new fabric called Wojo, 70% LIANZA wool and 30% recycled jute from all their coffee sack, which is going to go through all their stores in terms of chairs. And it's fantastic new use for wool, and they're paying us a royalty for that brand LIANZA, which of course we'll pay to farmers. So wool's time has come, the price has been rising all year. So it's tremendously exciting. We're now trying to stand it up, get farmers to capitalise the industry and get a frontier for wool. So that's what I've been doing a lot in the last year. But after about 18 months, so I just started getting involved in chairing Wool Partners. I suddenly had this sort of clear air headspace, and I thought, yes, now's the time to write my book. I'd actually read quite a lot on my year off, in between the shopping and the eating and the horse riding. And it was partly that, I guess. It was partly being exposed to, reading more and thinking about it. But I'd been approached by 2 publishers towards the end of my time at Telecom, and one wanted me to write a book that was really serious, serious. And one wanted me to write a book about what Bill Gates' house is really like. And I didn't really want to do either of those books, that type of book, or AE book then. But I remember flying back from America thinking, now is the time. So I rang up Random House and I said, look, if you still want me to write a book, this feels like the right time for me. But I want to write my own book. I'll do it myself. I don't need a ghostwriter, any support. I need an editor, but I'm going to write it. And it was a feeling like the book needed to be born. I said that to my friends. The book needed to be born. And when I finally sent it off 9 months later, I realised that it had been 9 months. Anyway, that was a fantastic experience, but it was sort of an abnormal 9 months for me, because to write you have to go inward, and I'm actually quite an extrovert, and so I had to go inward. And my sister came and lived with me, and she cooked for me because I don't cook, and it was a very cold winter in Wellington that year. I basically sort of went inward, and I kept a lot of information. When I left Telecom, I got my EA to print off all my diaries for all those 8 years. So that's how come the book is so detailed factually, at this time that happened, because I have all the diary records of it. And that was partly because I thought I might write a book, and partly because, just looking back on your life, you forget what happened when. I called the book Bird on a Wire for several reasons. The first is obvious. Woman on a telecommunications company, right? Obvious. The second is Bird on a Wire. It's a hire wire act running a company with billions of dollars. And thirdly, I was reflecting on the 2 years since then, which is from the Dylan song, "As Free as a Bird on a Wire," which is how I'd felt over the previous 2 years. So it's really got sort of three different meanings. And the other reason I wrote it, and I feel safe saying this in a room that's predominantly female, is that predominantly, I'm glad there's a few blokes here. I'm all for gender balance and diversity, but the reason that I feel safe saying it is because I do think it's not called his story for no reason. History is generally written by men. And I wanted to write my story. I mean, I'm quite overt. I wanted to write my story of the way those years were. And I wanted to write my story of where I saw the world was now, where I saw it was going. Any of you who've read my book, or if any of you read my book, you'll see it was finished in December '09, and I predicted in December '09 that Finn would be out and Curvy would be in. Well, it has been all this year. At all the runway shows in Europe, Louis Vuitton, it's all curvy. Have you noticed? That's the fashion again. Curvy. So I had great fun doing it. And then I basically went on an author tour. And author tour is, started out addressing rooms this size, and there'd be someone down there, and they'd all rush down and sign the book. I knew the author tour was done the day I went somewhere and there were 3 people. I thought, right, okay, I think that's done. Anyway, I should actually wrap up because I'm way over time and I was supposed to leave a couple of minutes for questions. Look, what have I learnt through all of that? The first thing is that you create your own reality. You can start with nothing and have a fantastic life. You can start with nothing and end with nothing. It's all, the way you approach things. I think attitude is absolutely everything. The importance of education. All my sisters and I, my younger sister didn't go to university, but my other 2 sisters did. I mean, just the ability that gives you to really do anything and move in any circle and, create your own life. Thirdly, I think the energy of the times we live in has completely changed from patriarchy to interconnectedness. When I became CEO of Telecom, my partner John said, because Telecom was owned by American companies, go and watch the Westerns, Theresa. You'll see everything you need to know about American corporate culture. He was right. I asked Warren Buffett at a Bill Gates CEO summit, how come in America the CEO and chairman being the one person is so ingrained that's not the British model? And Warren Buffett, who's a lovely bloke, looked at me as if I had a second brain, the first one to be lonely, and said, well, how can you have 2 jockeys on the one horse? So, that's their culture, whereas that sort of one person calling the shots, and, that person is either saint or sinner, hero or fallen guy, idolised, whatever. It's the whole John Wayne rides into town with Toto, sorts out the villagers and leaves. That's dead. The energy of the times is really all about connectiveness, and it's all about, it's not about one person has all the answers. There's no adult who's going to walk into this room and tell us what the answers are. And so, in that sense, I think it is a female time of being in the world because that is typically more of a female energy. But, some men love that sort of energy as well. They don't want to pretend that they know all the answers to everything all the time. That can be, hard work. So I think all the sort of the reading of mind, body, spirit, that category didn't exist when I was borrowing books with my mother from the library 30 years ago. That category just did simply not exist. All of that is about trying to tap into that sort of energy. So be authentic. Never has authenticity rung truer than it has today. Truths ring true. People follow people. They don't follow institutions. And then finally, I'm often asked, if I knew now what I knew then, what would I do differently? Or, what would... And for me, that would have been, for some reason, I grew up thinking that life was a sprint. I had to sprint and I had to win every race and all the rest of it. And now I understand that life is a marathon. There is time for everything. Thank you all very much.